Hi, welcome to month number 10 called Cloud 9 for this block of the month. It looks like this. And it also matches the fabric to block number 6. So if you want to go back in your fabric stash and pull that out, then you can save most of what you got for block number 10 to use for whatever project you're going to do at the end. So thank you for joining me this month for this month's tips and tricks. And we'll get started on those right now. And when I sew, instead of sewing right on the line or to this side of the line, I'm going to sew just a teeny smidge to this side of the line closer to the middle, and that will make my squares be just a teeny tiny bit either bigger or just right, and then I'll square them off at the end. I just find that that works better than trying to aim for a perfect line and then it ends up too small and you don't have enough space to be able to square it off. So here's an example of one of my finished blocks and how it's supposed to be 3.5 inches. And you can see that it is a little bit bigger than 3.5 inches. So I will take the ruler and just square it up and make sure that it ends up 3.5 inches on all sides. And this just helps make sure the block is a perfect size and that when I go to match everything up later, the points will match nicely. And I just find that it works much better if you just cut your block a smidge bigger and then square it up than if you aim to make it perfect in the first place. And just in case you're not sure how to square off a block, the block is supposed to measure 3.5 inches, so I'm using a 4.5 inch ruler. And you can see if you count down, it's 1, 2, 3.5, and the same thing for horizontally. So what you want to do is you want to line that line up on the crack of your block so that you'll be sure that your block has the same amount on both sides so your points will match up later. And then you want just a little bit of material on both of the sides, and then just double check to make sure that you have a little bit of material on the other sides while you're square it off when you're done with the first two sides. So first you have it on that center line, and you have a little bit of material on all sides after your 3.5 inch space. And then you trim this little bit off. And once you've done two sides, you just repeat the same thing, but match those edges up on your edges, and then do the center down the diagonal. And then you just trim the little bit of edges that are left on the two sides that you have remaining. And once you've done that on all four sides, that's how you square up a block. And also, whenever I square up my blocks like this, where I'm going to be working with them a lot and matching them up, I always do throw it back on the iron and just press it really quickly. And I feel like that just helps secure the stitching a little better, because these seams right here and at the other end where you've cut them will be a little bit weaker now that you've trimmed it off than they were before you trimmed them. So I do like to just throw it on the iron, to try to keep them secure so they don't peel apart as you're working with them. So in the directions for these blocks, it said that you could press them in either direction for your seam allowances as you are pressing your individual squares. But when you go to assemble your units, you'll find that depending which way you press, like for these two, when you go to attach them, because of the way I press these two, your seams will abut. It's really hard to get it to show up in the video, but where one side's high and one side's low, and that matches the opposite way to the other one, where one side's high and one side is low. And to get them to join nicely, that's sort of what you want to happen. And it will just make it easier to get a straight, smooth point to attach there. Like if you come up to the top where I did my seams, these two actually are not opposite. They're both the same when you turn it over. So what you end up with is where you get kind of a great big hill, because you have the high sides for both squares is on the same side. Like right here, they're both on the left. And the low sides are both on the right. So when you go to sew over these, you're going to end up getting kind of a hump, and it usually will get your point off just a little bit. So what I would recommend doing, and a little tip, is just if you find that when you go to lay out your pattern like this, that you end up having two hills that are going to be on the same side, I would just go back, whichever one has the lighter fabric, which in this case would be the green one, just re-iron your seams and do it the other way. and that will make it a lot easier to get a straight corner in those corners instead of being off by just a little bit. And it's kind of hard to see in this one, but in real life it's kind of noticeable. But I did not re-iron this one. I just did the two high sides together. And like I said, it's really not that noticeable on the camera. The left blue side is a little bit higher, but in real life, I don't know, it just looks a lot more noticeable where that point is just a little bit off. So that's why I would recommend ironing them to opposite sides instead of making a big hill to sew over. So now you can see where I took this one and went and ironed its seam allowance to the other side, and that way it made the high and low and the high and low be in opposite sides, so that when you go to sew those together, it'll make a nice abutment there, which will make that corner a lot easier to get a nice smooth point. Hi, thank you for joining me this month. Block number 10, Cloud 9, I think turned out really well. It was easier than I expected. When I first saw how many triangles and points there were, I wasn't sure if this would be pretty difficult or pretty easy, but it did end up being pretty easy, as long as after each time you made something, you referred back to the measurements in the pattern to make sure that you were keeping it the correct size. I was happy with how this one turned out and thought it was pretty easy overall. It definitely was the easiest cutting we've had in a long time. So I enjoyed this one, and I hope you did too. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you next month.